Are you drawn to the secrets of the medieval world? Stay with me, because I'm about to share 3 real horrors from the Middle Ages, where faith turned to madness and survival came at a terrible price. Let's begin. On July 14th, 1518, a woman named Frau Trophäa stepped into the narrow streets of Strasbourg and began to dance. There was no music, no festival, no reason at all. Witnesses watched as she moved with a strange, frantic rhythm. She danced through the day, through the night, and through the next 6 days, ignoring pleas to rest, her feet bleeding, her body trembling with exhaustion. Within a week, more than 30 people had joined her. By the end of August, the number had swelled to around 400 men and women, all seized by the same unstoppable compulsion. Some collapsed from sheer exhaustion. Others danced until their hearts gave out. Contemporary records speak of victims with torn clothes and bloody feet, faces locked in grimaces of pain as they spun in endless circles. The city council, desperate for a solution, turned first to music. Believing that the dancers might purge the illness by moving even more, officials built wooden stages and hired musicians to play day and night. But the pounding drums and flutes only fed the frenzy. Spectators described streets filled with bodies swaying in unison, a scene that felt less like celebration and more like mass possession. As the death toll rose, the council abandoned music and turned to the church. Priests declared that the victims were cursed by Saint Vitus, a martyr once believed to punish sinners with uncontrollable dancing. Groups of sufferers were loaded onto wagons and taken to the shrine of Saint Vitus in Severn, about 30 miles away. There, priests led processions, sprinkled holy water, and performed special masses. Dancers were guided around the altar in red shoes, while guardians kept them from collapsing. Many reported relief after these rituals, but the plague itself faded as suddenly as it began, vanishing by early September. The Strasbourg outbreak was not unique. Similar dancing manias had struck Europe before, from Aachen in 1374 to scattered villages along the Rhine. Chroniclers described men and women leaping and shouting, claiming to see rivers of blood or invisible demons driving them onward. To witnesses, it seemed like witchcraft or divine punishment. To modern historians, it remains one of the strangest epidemics ever recorded. What caused it? Some point to ergot poisoning, a fungus in rye that can trigger hallucinations. But ergot victims are typically weak and bedridden, not capable of days of violent motion. Others suggest neurological illness, but no disease spreads to hundreds at once. The most accepted theory is mass psychogenic illness, a collective hysteria born of famine, disease, and relentless social stress. In the years before 1518, Strasbourg suffered failed harvests, severe weather swings, and repeated outbreaks of the plague. The people were hungry, frightened, and traumatized. Perhaps dancing became an unconscious escape, a desperate release of tension in a world that felt cursed. Whatever the cause, the records agree on one thing. For weeks that summer, the streets of Strasbourg belonged to the dancers. No one who witnessed it ever forgot the sight of hundreds of neighbors spinning and stamping, as if some unseen hand forced their bodies to move. The dancing finally stopped, but the fear of dark forces only grew. Across Europe, suspicion and superstition found new targets, this time in the quiet streets of Bamberg, where priests and judges claimed to hunt the devil himself. Our next story begins in a cathedral city, about to be consumed by fire and accusation. In the early 17th century, the Prince-Bishopric of Bamberg in Franconia became the stage for one of Europe's most terrifying witch persecutions. Between 1626 and 1631, while the 30 Years' War raged across the Holy Roman Empire, fear and superstition spread like wildfire. Years of failed harvests, sudden frosts, and outbreaks of plague convinced many that the devil was at work. When crops rotted in the fields, or wine barrels soured in their cellars, the blame fell not on weather or war, but on witches. The ruler of Bamberg, Prince Bishop Johann Georg Fuchs von Dornheim, believed it was his sacred duty to root out Satan's servants. Nicknamed the Hexenbischof, the Witch Bishop, he established a special tribunal to hunt down suspects and built a grim fortress of justice. The Malefice-Haus, or Witch House. This heavy stone building contained torture chambers, secret cells, and a chapel where prisoners were forced to confess before God while their bodies were broken on the rack. Accusations began with whispers. A neighbor who baked bread during a famine, a farmer whose field escaped a storm, a woman who healed the sick with herbs. Any small difference could spark suspicion. Once arrested, victims were interrogated with a cruelty refined over decades of European witch trials. Thumbscrews crushed the fingers, strappado ropes wrenched shoulders from their sockets, and burning sulfur was pressed to bare skin until the accused signed confessions of impossible crimes. Raising tempests, spoiling crops, flying to Sabbaths, or sleeping with demons. Between 600 and 900 people were executed in Bamberg and the surrounding villages in just 5 years. Men, women, and even children were burned at the stake. Wealth or status offered no protection. Merchants, priests, city councilors, and farmers all met the same fate. One of the most shocking cases was Johannes Junius, the respected mayor of Bamberg. Arrested in 1628, he endured weeks of torture before finally signing a false confession. From his cell, he secretly smuggled a letter to his daughter Veronica. In it, he swore his innocence and described the agony of the rack and the relentless interrogations, writing that he confessed only because
I would have confessed anything rather than endure the torture again.
His letter survives today, one of the most haunting personal documents of the European witch craze. The frenzy eventually consumed even the powerful. Noble families were denounced, and some of the Prince Bishop's own allies were accused when their wealth became tempting to confiscate. Property seizures filled the bishop's treasury, giving the persecutions a dark financial motive, as well as a religious one. By 1631, pressure from the Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand II, along with outrage from neighboring territories and the sheer economic collapse caused by constant executions, finally forced an end to the trials. Prince Bishop Dornheim fled the city, leaving behind hundreds of legal records, letters, and execution lists, grim evidence of a terror that had turned a prosperous cathedral town into a place of mass murder. Today, the surviving trial documents and the desperate words of Johannes Junius allow us to hear the voices of those who suffered. Their stories remind us how fear, war, and religious zeal can twist justice into cruelty, and how quickly a community can sacrifice reason when it believes the devil walks among them. Centuries before the witch hunt set Europe ablaze, a very different movement was already underway. In 1212, it wasn't warriors or priests who set out for Jerusalem, but children. Driven by visions of divine command, Thousands left their homes believing their innocence would win back the Holy Land. A journey that would end as one of the most heartbreaking tragedies of the Middle Ages. In the summer of 1212, Europe was still haunted by famine, disease, and the unending call for crusades to the Holy Land. Out of this restless world came a movement unlike anything the Church or the rulers of Christendom had ever seen. It began on the banks of the Rhine in the city of Cologne. A boy of about 14, known only as Nicholas, claimed that Christ had appeared to him, commanding that Jerusalem be freed not by armies of knights, but by the pure faith of children. He preached that the seas themselves would part for the innocent. Crowds gathered to hear his voice. Parents tried to restrain their sons and daughters, but the young slipped away, convinced they were chosen by God. By midsummer, thousands of children, adolescents, and impoverished adults marched south with Nicholas. They followed the river through Koblenz, Speyer, and Strasbourg, then struggled across the Alps toward the port city of Genoa. The journey was brutal. The year had brought poor harvests and scarce food. Many walked barefoot or wrapped their feet in rags. Hunger and cold thinned their numbers long before they reached Italy. Those who survived the Alpine passes expected a miracle, the waters of the Mediterranean opening before them, but the sea remained still. Some turned back, defeated. Others wandered along the coast, hoping for passage. A small group reached Rome, where Pope Innocent III praised their devotion, but forbade any attempt to continue. Many never returned home, lost to disease, starvation, or the dangers of the road. At the same time, in northern France, another boy, the shepherd Stephen of Cloyes, claimed that Jesus had appeared to him in a vision, giving the same command. He, too, promised that the sea would open. Thousands of children and poor villagers followed him south toward Marseille. When the Mediterranean failed to part, merchants offered ships. 7 vessels were said to have set sail. 2 were wrecked in storms near Sardinia. The remaining ships carried their passengers not to Jerusalem, but to North Africa, where many of the children were sold into slavery. Only a few ever made it back to Europe to tell their story. Contemporary chroniclers disagreed on how to understand these events. Some called the children saints and martyrs. Others condemned the movements as the work of the devil. Modern historians see a mixture of religious fervor, social despair, and mass psychology. Europe in 1212 was still reeling from famine, local outbreaks of plague, and the failures of earlier crusades. For many of the poor, the promise of a miraculous journey offered both escape and purpose. No child ever reached Jerusalem. Most disappeared into the silence of history, victims of hunger, storms, and exploitation. Yet the chronicles of Cologne, Genoa, and Marseille preserve the memory of this tragic march, a movement born of faith, driven by desperation, and a reminder of how powerful and how dangerous human belief can be. These were not ghost stories. They were human ones. The dancers of Strasbourg, the accused of Bamberg, the children who marched toward a holy city they would never see. Each left behind documents, letters, and bones that still speak today. They remind us how fear, devotion, and desperation can drive people to both courage and cruelty. Remember their stories, and the fragile line between faith and madness. That was Epic Nightmare. Until next time, keep your eyes open, because history's darkest truths are never as distant as they seem.